My name is Sandy, and I'm 30 years old now, and when I say these words, they ring inside me like an echo of the girl I was and the woman I've become, because every time I look back on my life, I realize that what I call my story today began not with my first step into adulthood, but much earlier, in those years before I was 10, when I looked at the world with wide eyes, unaware that behind every adult gesture lay an invisible system of expectations and responsibilities that would keep me chained for a long time. My parents always repeated to me, almost like a prayer, that caring for my little sister, Malin, was not only a duty but an honor, and they said it as if I should be grateful to be older and responsible, when in fact, I longed for someone to look at me, just once, with the same warmth with which they looked at her. She was 6 years younger than me, so small and fragile, with soft curls that my mother combed so carefully in the mornings. I stood next to her, watching her smile, and I understood that even then, back in elementary school, a strange feeling had settled in my heart. Something was wrong here, something was broken, and only I knew about it, while everyone else pretended everything was fine. Every week, Malin got pocket money for candy and toys, and I got nothing, and it was as if this was written into some invisible family law that I didn't sign but had to obey. I remember standing by the school vending machine, watching the other kids, looking at each other mischievously, buy themselves candy bars and soda after school, while my pockets remained empty, and this feeling of emptiness inside, it became heavier than any hunger. When I asked my mother why, she'd shrug with cold weariness and say, "You don't need it, Sandy," then add her favorite phrase, "Your sister knows," as if that explained everything, and I learned not to complain, because every attempt to say anything only worsened the atmosphere at home. Dad would grow gloomy, Mom would purse her lips, Malin would look at me with pity, and it felt like the world was crumbling beneath my feet. When I turned 15, I realized I couldn't stand it anymore, and then, trembling with fear, I went to get a part-time job at the local grocery store, where after school and on weekends I stocked shelves with heavy boxes and jars of sauces, trying to smile at the customers as if I enjoyed it. The pay wasn't great, but the money was mine, the only one that smelled of my freedom. And yet even that little I was once again spending on someone else. Malin, seeing me with my paycheck, would look at me with her big puppy eyes and quietly ask, "Sandy, could you please buy me a new Barbie doll?" And I, feeling my insides tighten, would still answer, "Yes, of course," even though I knew that afterward I would only eat peanut butter sandwiches and wear the same 3 outfits to school, all of which had long since faded. My parents didn't notice how hard I worked, how much I devoted myself to this family, how little I kept for myself. They were too busy caring for Malin, discussing her grades, her friends, her clubs and trips, her small successes that were presented as great victories at every family dinner, and I increasingly felt like a shadow, moving around but no longer needed. Sometimes I thought, if I disappeared, they probably wouldn't notice until Malin needed something else. In high school, everything was the same, 20 hours a week of work. The money went to my sister. My mom would proudly tell her friends, "Sandy is such a good sister, she takes such good care of Malin," and I would listen and remain silent, because I knew no one would ask me what I wanted or whether I needed anything myself. I studied as if I was saving myself. Studying was my refuge, my escape. I was lucky, I received a full scholarship to college, and when I heard the news, I cried all night, not even from happiness, but from the fact that for the first time in so many years I wouldn't have to depend on someone else. I chose computer science, not because it was my dream, but because I knew this profession would give me financial security, the opportunity to finally live the way I wanted, without the constant fear of running out of money again tomorrow. In college, I felt free for the first time. I lived in a dorm, ate in the cafeteria, went to classes, and thought only of myself, and this simple freedom seemed like a luxury. I made friends who didn't know about my family, didn't know about Malin, didn't know how I carried other people's lives on my back. Over the course of 4 years, I almost forgot what it was like to constantly need, to constantly give, but that freedom ended the day I graduated. Malin was planning to go to college, and my parents made it clear what they expected of me. "Sandy, you have a good job now," Dad said at my graduation dinner, not looking me in the eye, as if it wasn't a conversation but an order. Mom, without blinking, added, "We can't afford to pay for everything, you know how expensive college is." I wanted to remind them that they hadn't paid a penny for my education, that I'd done it all myself, but I remained silent. I'd long since realized that fighting then was futile. At 24, I got my first real job, as an IT specialist at a major bank. The pay was good, better than I could ever have imagined, but instead of enjoying it, I immediately started sending money to Malin. First it was rent, then groceries, then textbooks, then clothes, then money for entertainment. Before I knew it, I was paying for her entire lifestyle. While I lived in a cheap one-bedroom apartment and ate ramen noodles almost every night, the worst were family gatherings. Every Sunday, every holiday, every small family occasion, since childhood, seemed to be played on the same record. Everything revolved around Malin, her friends, her hobbies, her plans, her future, her boyfriends, her courses, and her dreams, while I sat at the table like an inconspicuous piece of furniture, a forced smile on my face, drawing attention to myself only when it was time to discuss how much money my sister would need for the next important thing. The years passed, as if I were walking down a narrow hallway that led nowhere, and even when I was finally able to move into a better apartment, the walls around me felt just as bare, and the smell of noodles in the evening still reminded me that I lived modestly because I continued to give most of my income to Malin. She graduated from college and got a job, but it was as if nothing had changed, because her requests were still there: car repairs, security deposits, vacation pay, designer clothes for work, always something else. And each something else was framed by her voice, sounding like it was a matter of course. And then came that Sunday dinner, which, as I now understand, changed my life, even though at that moment I walked to my parents' house the same way I had hundreds of times before, with the familiar heaviness in my chest and the familiar smile with which I had learned to cover up my irritation and fatigue. Malin was there with her boyfriend, Jake, who she'd been dating for about 2 years. He was a nice enough guy, tall, slightly stooped, with a soft smile that never lingered longer than 5 minutes, as our conversations always ended before they even began. We all sat down at the dinner table, and Dad, looking at us over his glasses, cleared his throat as if he were about to make a national announcement, and the room immediately grew quieter. Only the clock on the wall ticked away the seconds. "Malin and Jake are getting married," he said with a wide, slightly forced smile. I looked at my sister, who was practically glowing, her eyes sparkling like a child's at Christmas, and Jake sat next to me, nervous but clearly happy. I knew I should be happy for them, and part of me really did want to be, but another, tired part of me could only think about how much this was going to cost me now. "That's wonderful," I said, trying to sound sincere, and immediately added, "Congratulations." "Thank you," Malin beamed. "We're so excited and want to have an engagement party next month." My mom nodded enthusiastically, clapping her hands, as if she was already imagining the photos on social media. "It'll be wonderful. We've already started looking at the venue," she said. And then came the words I'd been dreading: "Of course, we'll need help with the event costs," Malin said casually, as if discussing the weather. "We'll need to pay for the venue, catering, and a DJ. You'll help us out, right, Sandy?" All eyes turned to me like spotlights, and I felt the usual roll, smile and say yes, waiting to burst from my lips, but something inside me made me slow down for the first time in years. "Of course," I replied slowly, feeling my yes turn into a cautious condition. "I can help, as long as it's not too expensive." Malin's face lit up like a child finding a present under the tree on Christmas morning. "Oh, Sandy, you're the best. I'll send you an estimate very soon so you can see exactly what we need," she said, leaning toward me as if it were just a formality. The next day at work, in my sterile office, filled with white light and the sound of keyboards, I received an email from Malin with the subject line, "Our budget." So excited. I opened it during my lunch break, expecting to see something reasonable, maybe a couple of thousand, but the document was attached as a PDF, and when I opened it, my jaw literally dropped. At the bottom, in bold letters, was the total: $10,000. I scrolled through the detailed list, unable to believe what I was reading. The space rental alone cost $4,000, then the flower shop $1,500, professional catering $2,500, a DJ $800, champagne towers $600, ice sculptures $500, and a full-blown fireworks display for $700. My heart was pounding and my hands were shaking as I picked up the phone to call Malin. She answered on the second ring, her voice as cheerful and carefree as ever. "Hey, Sandy. How's it going?" she asked, as if I was about to praise her for her plan. "Malin, what the hell is this?" I said, trying to keep my voice level, even though I was seething inside. $10,000, are you serious? Oh, come on, it's not that much, she said dismissively, and I could almost see her shrug on the other end of the line. I've been very sensible, I could have spent a lot more. I rubbed my forehead, feeling a headache coming on, the one that always comes when I think about money. Malin, I said slowly, I said I'd help if it was inexpensive. It's not inexpensive. But you promised to help me, she drawled, her tone changing, a little hurt, almost childish. You always help me. And this is my engagement, Sandy. It's a once-in-a-lifetime event. You can get money from mom and dad, or Jake can contribute, he'll be my husband. And while she was saying this, I looked out the window at the gray city, at the people below going about their business, and thought that perhaps for the first time in my life, I'd have to say no and hear my own voice. There was a silence on the other end of the line for a few seconds, so deep that all I could hear was my own breathing and the pounding of my heart in my temples. In that pause, I still hoped Malin would come to her senses and say something kind, but her voice, when it returned, was icy, alien, as if I were talking not to my sister but to the woman I owed money to. Mom and Dad have already given us everything they could, she said dryly, and Jake is saving for the wedding, and I can't ask him for more money. I closed my eyes, clenched my teeth, and said firmly, then maybe you should cut your budget. Look, I want to help you celebrate, but the most I can give you is $3,000, that's it. 3,000? Her scream was so sharp that I jerked the phone away from my ear. That's not even enough to rent the venue. Sandy, I already told everyone you'll pay for my entire party. I can't change that now. I felt my blood pressure skyrocket, the blood pounding in my head. Malin, you can't just assume I'll pay for everything without asking me first. That's not how things work, she sobbed, but there wasn't a shred of remorse in her voice, only reproach. But you always did that, you've never said no before. I took a deep breath and blurted out, well, now I'm saying no. $3,000, whatever you want. This isn't funny, Sandy, she groaned, almost shrilly. I need this money, and I need to pay my bills. Then I'll have to find another way or scale back my plans, I said. And heard a short disconnect tone. She hung up, hung on me as if I were a cranky ATM that had suddenly refused to dispense cash. I sat there, holding the phone, staring into space, unable to believe she had the nerve to end the conversation that way, as if I was the one acting like a spoiled teenager. 20 minutes passed, and the phone vibrated again. Mom was on the screen. I answered, and her voice immediately became sharp. Sandy, what did you do to your sister? She's crying. I closed my eyes and said evenly, I told her I can't pay $10,000 for her engagement. 10,000? Mom seemed taken aback for a second. That seems like a lot. I almost felt relieved, thinking maybe she'd at least show some common sense. But then I heard, but you know, Malin is younger than you, she needs your help, you're making good money now. Mom, I tried to keep my voice calm. If she can't afford such an expensive party, then she should cut back, and why can't Jake pay for his own engagement? They both have jobs. Mom sighed heavily, as if I were a stubborn child. Well, Jake is saving for their future together, and that's important to Malin. I felt anger rise in my chest and asked, what about what's important to me? I've supported her for years. I paid for her college education, her car, her rent. When will it end? There was a pause on the other end, and then Mom said quietly, we're not talking about the wedding yet. Something in her voice made me go cold. What do you mean? I asked. I mean, we haven't discussed the wedding costs. That's later, she replied, and her tone was filled with that same certainty that literally paralyzed me. Oh my God, I whispered, you've already talked about the wedding, haven't you? You want me to pay for that too, Sandy, don't be dramatic, Mom snapped. Right now, we're focusing on the engagement party. No way, I said sharply, absolutely not. If I pay for the party, you'll expect me to pay for the entire wedding. Where does that leave me, Mom? She tried to soften her voice. Let's just take it one step at a time. Your sister really needs your help. I could barely speak from anger, and the words burst from my lips. Fine, $3,000 for the engagement, that's my final offer. If that's not enough, she needs to come up with another plan, and I hung up before Mom could drag me into another argument. My heart was pounding like I'd run a marathon, and I felt sick with the overwhelming emotion. I'd never confronted my family so openly before, and it was terrifying and at the same time strangely liberating. but I knew they wouldn't give in so easily. Over the next few days, Malin began posting on Instagram and Facebook, as if holding a public trial. Every day, a new post appeared about how her sister had refused to help her with her engagement party, how she'd never expected such a betrayal from the person closest to her. She'd post old photos of us as children, with me holding her hand, or with us both laughing, and she'd caption it, "I thought my big sister would always be there for me." And apparently for some people, money is more important than family. But the worst part were the videos. Malin sat in front of the camera, her face tear-stained, her voice shaking, talking about how heartbroken she was because I'd abandoned her in her time of need. And as I watched those videos, I felt like the world was crumbling around me, not because she'd lied to strangers, but because for the first time in my life, I saw the extent to which my sister was willing to humiliate me just to get her way again. My phone started ringing constantly, as if someone, somewhere, had given the go-ahead, and now the entire family clan felt it was their duty to lecture me, and it felt like an endless avalanche of reproaches and accusations, under which I felt less and less. Cousins, aunts, uncles, relatives, even longtime family friends, everyone seemed to suddenly think they knew better than me how I should manage my money and my heart. And every new call sounded the same, with the same reproach, "Sandy, how could you? Sandy, it's just money," Aunt Linda said during a particularly painful conversation. Her voice simultaneously judgmental and condescending, as if she were talking to a child rather than a woman who had long ago learned to pay her own bills. "Family is more important than money, she's your little sister," my cousin Mike added when he called the next day, and I found myself clutching the phone so tightly I thought I could break it with my fingers, because behind his words lay the same old refrain, I have to, I don't have the right to say no." Even my grandmother, my quiet, once supportive grandmother, called and said in a trembling voice that she was disappointed in me, and that was perhaps the most painful of all, because I knew there were other voices behind her words, whispering what a bad daughter, a bad sister, a bad person I was. The guilt became unbearable, it haunted me day and night, burning my chest and twisting my stomach, and I began to wonder, maybe they were right? Maybe I really was selfish, maybe it would be easier for me to pay for this stupid party and end this torturous course of judgment than to justify myself over and over again. And as if that weren't enough, Malin started sending photos to our family chat, old pictures of me holding her as a baby, feeding her a bottle, pushing her on a swing, and each photo accompanied by long messages about how much I once loved and cared for her, and how everything had changed now that money was involved. I couldn't stand it anymore. The constant calls, the social media posts, the photos hinting at betrayal, the guilt that ate away at me like acid. I felt like I was drowning in shame and pressure from all sides, and the more I tried to resist, the deeper this bottomless pit pulled me. Finally, I broke. I dialed her number, and as soon as she answered, the first thing I said, without even giving her time to say hello, was, "Fine, I'll pay for your engagement, but this will be my wedding gift too. You, don't expect anything else when you get married, Malin." She squealed with delight, so loud and sincere that I thought she'd won the lottery. "I knew you could do it," she screamed, "I knew you could never leave me. Just send me your information, and I'll give you the suppliers. You're the best sister in the world. I love you so much." And at that moment, after hanging up, I felt a hollow, cold emptiness inside me, as if I'd been robbed. I gave in to the pressure again, gave in again, as always, but somewhere deep down I tried to convince myself that this time I'd at least set a boundary. I wouldn't pay for the wedding, that meant something, right? But within an hour of our conversation, a long email arrived from Melina, with dozens of contacts, wedding planners, catering companies, florists, DJs, banquet venues. She'd already prepared everything, found everything, and organized it all, as if she'd known all along that I'd eventually cave and was just waiting for the right moment to hand me this ream of information. I spent the rest of the week with my phone in hand, calling, making arrangements, transferring deposits, and each transaction left a pain in my chest. The venue wanted half the amount up front, $2,000, the catering company, $1,500, the florist, $800. By the time I finished, the total had already surpassed $6,000, and the party was still 3 weeks away. I looked at the numbers in my account and couldn't believe I was trapped like this again, but it was too late to stop. The following Sunday, as usual, I went to my parents' house for dinner, hoping to find some peace there, but when I walked into the house, I saw Malin sitting at the kitchen table with my mom, surrounded by piles of wedding magazines and vendor brochures. "Sunday," my mom called, her voice filled with joy. "The timing is perfect, come see these beautiful flowers." I reluctantly walked over and sat next to her, though my whole body resisted. The table was littered with photographs of exquisite floral arrangements, each one looking as if it would cost more than my monthly rent. "Aren't they gorgeous?" Malin exclaimed, pointing to the enormous centerpiece of white roses and baby's breath. "I think they'll be perfect for an engagement party." I blinked. Confused, "I thought we already picked out the flowers." Malin waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, yes, of course we did, these are for the real wedding. I'm just putting ideas together." My stomach sank, my breath caught, and I looked straight at her and said, "Malin, I told you the engagement party is my wedding gift. I won't pay for your wedding either." She simply waved her hand dismissively and said with a smile, I know, I'm just looking. It's okay to dream, right?" Mom and Malin continued throughout dinner discussing the party details, the guest list, the decorations, the schedule, while I sat nearby like a stranger, feeling a bitter mixture of helplessness and anger welling up inside me, but I didn't say another word. I spent most of the evening in silence, picking at my plate and trying not to mentally count the thousands of dollars I'd already spent on someone else's celebration. I only nodded occasionally when Mom or Malin exchanged excited comments about the upcoming party, feigning even the slightest interest. After dinner, I was about to leave when I noticed a neatly folded piece of paper on the table. Something inside me told me to pass it by, but curiosity got the better of me, and I picked it up. It turned out to be the guest list. I scanned the names, expecting to see a couple dozen close relatives and a few family friends, and maybe that would help me at least slightly justify the extent of this celebration. But the list was long, at least 60 or even 70 people, and the further I read, the colder my stomach grew. I recognized a few names, cousins, an aunt and uncle. A couple of Melina's friends I'd seen before, but most of the names were completely foreign to me. Jake's colleagues, some friends of their friends, people from Melina's office. I read the list to the end and suddenly realized I couldn't find the most important name, mine. I flipped through the page again, twice, 3 times, tracing each line with my finger, but still couldn't find mine. My heart pounded in my chest, as if warning me that everything was about to change. "Malin," I called, holding the paper in my hands, trying to keep my voice steady, "why isn't my name on the guest list?" She looked up from her magazine, a guilty glimmer in her gaze that she immediately tried to hide. My mother, sitting next to me, suddenly became desperately busy. She picked up the plates and went to the sink, as if they needed to be washed to a sparkle right then and there. "Oh, right," Malin drawled, avoiding my eyes. "Well, Mom and I were talking about it, and we thought you might not fit in with this group. The people we invite are more open, more fun, and you're always too serious at parties, Sandy. Besides, you've never liked big crowds." I stared at her, completely bewildered. "Wait, I'm paying $10,000 for your engagement party, and you're not even inviting me?" My voice cracked, higher than I expected, and trembled with anger. Mom finally turned around and spoke softly, as if trying to smooth things over. "We just thought you'd be more comfortable at home. We made sure you didn't feel out of place." "You're both crazy," I blurted out, feeling my palms grow hot. "I'm paying for your entire party, and you think I shouldn't be there?" Malin rolled her eyes and leaned back in her chair. "You're being dramatic, as always," she said coldly. And then I realized it was over, that my patience had run out. "Okay," I said, grabbing my purse from the chair, "if I wasn't invited, I'm not paying." "Sandy, wait," Mom began, holding out her hand, but I was already heading for the door, and every step I took echoed loudly in my chest. I slammed the door harder than I'd probably ever done in my life, and I heard the noise rising behind me, their voices, their shouts, their indignation, but I didn't care. I walked to the car, got behind the wheel, and drove home, swallowing back the tears that stung my eyes. At home, I turned off the sound on my phone because I needed silence. I needed to process everything that had just happened, but the screen kept glowing and flashing notifications. When I finally looked at it, there were already 12 missed calls and 8 messages. And the worst of all was a message from Melina herself. She wrote, "I always knew you were greedy and selfish. You're just jealous because I have a fiancé and you can't even go on a date. No wonder you're still single at 30. You're ugly. both inside and out. These words struck me like a knife in the back, and I suddenly realized that all those years I'd supported her, paid for college, the car, the apartments, the clothes, none of it had ever mattered to her. That's what she truly thought of me. This anger, this bitterness, pushed me to the brink, and I couldn't remain silent or wait any longer. I grabbed my laptop, sat down at the table, and started calling all the vendors I'd left deposits with. "Hello, this is Sandy Morrison. I need to cancel all reservations for Melina Morrison's engagement party on the 28th, one by one, the venue, the caterer, the florist, the DJ." Every conversation was the same: polite voices, apologies for the inconvenience, confirmation of the cancellation. In 2 hours, I cancelled everything, and, of course, each company charged me cancellation fees. The restaurant withheld $2,000, the caterer $800, the florist $400. By the time I finished, I realized I'd lost almost $3,000 in fees alone, and had only gotten back about $3,000 of the $6,000 I'd already spent. And it was this, the fact that I'd lost such a huge amount of money, that angered me even more than all the words and accusations. Around 9 o'clock that night, my phone rang again, and the name of David, the party coordinator, the man I'd spoken to more often than my own family in recent weeks, flashed across the screen. His voice was tense, even a little confused, as he said, "Sandy, I just got a call from all our vendors saying everything's cancelled. What's going on? Is there a problem?" I took a deep breath, tightened my grip on the phone, and answered firmly, leaving no room for doubt. No problem. I'm simply not paying for this event anymore. From now on, you'll have to deal directly with Malin. I won't be involved." He tried to argue, bringing up contracts and deposits, but I cut him off. "I've already cancelled everything, good luck." And without giving him a second to respond, I hung up, feeling a strange relief in my chest. Now they can figure out how to save their fancy party without my money. After my conversation with the organizer, I felt like I had lost all my strength to endure the chaos. I turned off my phone completely and resolved to forget the drama existed for the night, because no call or message could change what had happened. I drank a glass of wine, sat quietly by the window, and allowed myself, for the first time in years, to feel not guilt, but freedom. But when I turned it back on in the morning, the screen was filled with notifications. 53 missed calls and over 100 messages. I scrolled through them, sipping strong black coffee, and the more I read, the more a cold lump grew inside me. Most of the messages were from family, but a few were from cousins I hadn't heard from in months. Apparently, rumors of what had happened had spread faster than a fire in a dry field. Aunt Linda wrote 3 times, begging me to call her back immediately. My cousin Mike launched into a long tirade about family loyalty and duty. Even my grandmother, who could barely use the keys on her phone, somehow managed to send a message calling me selfish and ungrateful. But the worst were the messages from my closest relatives. My mom sent about 20 in a row, starting with a timid "please call me back" and ending with an accusatory "how could you do this to your sister?" My dad left a few voicemails, but I couldn't even bring myself to press play, and Malin, her words were so venomous that I wanted to throw my phone out the window. She called me every name imaginable, and in every message, she accused me of ruining her life. The last message was short, but it hit the hardest. "I hope you're happy, you ruined everything." I was sitting at the kitchen table amid this torrent of anger and reproach when suddenly there was a furious pounding on the door. The pounding made the dishes on the shelves shake. "Sandy!" I heard Dad's voice. "We know you're in there, open the door right now." The shouts grew louder. I could distinguish Mom and Malin, interrupting each other, demanding, pleading, accusing. "You ruined everything." Malin screamed through the door, "Because of you, my entire engagement party got cancelled." "Sandy, this is ridiculous." Mom screamed, "You have to fix this right now." I stood in the kitchen, clutching my cup, my heart pounding so hard I was afraid they'd hear it through the walls. I waited for them to get tired and leave, but the knocking continued for almost 20 minutes. Finally, something snapped inside me, and I went to the door, but I wasn't going to open it. I stopped a few steps away, gathered all the anger in my throat, and shouted, "I'm not opening this door." "Sandy, stop acting like a child," Dad demanded. "You have to fix what you've done." Malin screamed, and then I felt I couldn't keep silent any longer, as all these years of accumulated numbers and resentments were bursting out. "Do you want to know what I realized?" I screamed through the door. I've counted every dollar I've given you over the last 8 years, Malin, over $80,000, and that's just what I can remember. A silence fell behind the door, so thick I could almost hear my own breathing. I'm done, I continued, my voice no longer shaking. I will never give you a cent, not for the engagement, not for the wedding, not for anything. You're adults, you have jobs, figure it out yourselves. You promised to help me forever. Malin screamed, tears in her voice, you said yourself that you would never invite me to your wedding after this. I added, and suddenly felt a bitter irony, well, I wouldn't have gone anyway. They continued shouting and banging on the door for a few minutes, but then finally fell silent. I went to the window and watched them get into the car, still arguing, waving their arms, and not noticing me behind the curtain. And the next day, Malin unleashed all her anger on social media. She wrote a long tirade about how I betrayed her, broke my promise to help her, and ruined her future. She made it sound like I was solely to blame for the failure of her engagement, and, of course, her friends rushed to support her, vying with each other to leave comments about what a terrible sister I was. I watched this, felt the familiar anger boiling within me, and in one fell swoop, unfollowed her on all social media. I was tired of watching her portray herself as the victim and me as the villain. About a month later, while idly scrolling through my Instagram feed over my morning coffee, I stumbled upon photos from Malin's engagement party. They were posted by Sarah, one of her friends I was still in touch with, and curiosity got the better of me, so I lingered on the screen and began scrolling through the images one by one. The party, it turned out, had actually happened, but it looked nothing like the grandiose $10,000 affair Malin had so persistently tried to organize. It took place in my parents' backyard, among the old trees and tattered wooden fence I remembered from my childhood, and there were no more than 20 guests, all familiar faces, close family and longtime friends. The photos contained none of what Malin had promised herself or demanded of me. No ice sculptures, no champagne tower, no expensive, professionally arranged white roses and baby's breath. I saw plastic plates, disposable cups, salads in simple bowls, and the food was clearly homemade, most likely prepared by my mother. Instead of dazzling everyone with luxury, the evening looked quiet and simple, with a couple of modest garlands and a small cake on the table, but that wasn't what struck me most. It was Malin's expression that pierced me. Even in the photos where she tried to smile, her gaze betrayed melancholy, her lips were pressed together, her smile seemed forced, and in every frame she looked as if she were attending someone else's funeral rather than a celebration. And at that moment, I felt strangely sorry for her. All this drama, all this screaming, endless messages, all this poisonous torrent of accusations, and in the end, she got exactly that small, modest party that I would have gladly paid for from the start, without batting an eye. It all seemed like a bitter irony, as if life had decided to show her that its whims don't always lead to the desired outcome. After those photos, I didn't hear from my family for 3 months, and it turned out to be the longest period of silence since my childhood, and, frankly, it was like breathing deeply for the first time. No constant pressure, no demanding calls, no guilt hanging over my every decision. I hadn't realized how much stress their expectations had caused me until it all finally disappeared. I decided to channel the money that had previously been wasted on other people's whims into my own dreams. I started saving for an apartment, not a tiny studio with peeling walls, but a real, spacious apartment in a good neighborhood, where I would have a place to live, not just survive. For the first time in my adult life, I was putting myself first, and the feeling was almost frighteningly new, yet incredibly liberating. Then one day, I opened my email and saw a message from Malin with the subject line, wedding invitation. My heart sank, and my first instinct was to delete it immediately, without even reading it, but curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked on it. In the message, she wrote, Sandy, I want to let you know that you're still invited to my wedding. I know we've had our differences, but you're still my sister. However, before you come, you'll have to apologize to me for what you did and pay me $15,000 toward the wedding expenses. After that, I'll forgive you, and we can put this all behind us. I read this and couldn't help but laugh, a real, loud laugh that echoed throughout the apartment. Even after everything that had happened, she still managed to believe that I would become her wallet again, that I was obligated to apologize and buy her forgiveness with my own money. At that moment, I finally understood, she would never change. I typed a short reply, Malin, you can cross my name off the guest list, I won't be attending your wedding, and I don't need your forgiveness. I'll think about mending our relationship when you realize how terribly you treated your sister and apologize yourself. For now, leave me alone. I hit send and immediately blocked her email address so that no further demands would reach me. Now I don't even think about how her wedding is going or what new scenes she's causing. I finally have my own plans, my own dreams, and they no longer revolve around other people's whims. I'm saving up for an apartment, thinking about affording a vacation to Europe next year, the one I've dreamed about for so many years, but never had the money for while it all went to supporting someone else's life. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever be able to rebuild my relationship with my family, but then I remember how they treated me, how they saw me only as a source of income, and I realize I'm better off without them.